Hey guys, Jared here, and today we're going to be benchmarking two laptops to compare the Nvidia 1070 against the newer 1080 with Max-Q design to see just how much better the newer card performs and find out if it's worth upgrading to. First, let's discuss the differences between these two laptops. The laptop with the 1070 has 10GB of DDR4 RAM at 2400MHz, while the laptop with the Max-Q 1080 has 24GB. Although the difference is small, I've previously run benchmarks with different amounts of memory and found that in general, additional memory can improve overall frames per second in games. However, the increases seem to tail off after 16GB. Basically, just be aware that a small percentage of the difference may be due to the difference in memory, as we're only testing at the 1080p resolution here, as that's the display that both laptops use. Other than that, both laptops have the same Intel 7700 HQ quad-core CPU and use an SSD for the primary hard drive, which is running Windows 10, with all available updates applied. No manual overclocking was performed for any of these tests, and G-Sync and VSync were both disabled. The main difference here is of course that one laptop is running with an Nvidia GeForce GTX 1070, while the newer laptop has an Nvidia GeForce GTX 1080 with Max-Q. We can see straight away that the specs are a bit different. In particular, the Max-Q 1080 has more CUDA cores than the 1070, but it's clocked slower to keep it cooler and quieter. With that in mind, let's take a look at our benchmarks and find out how each of these cards perform. We'll cover both real-world gaming benchmarks, as well as the results of some benchmarking tools. In PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, we can see some interesting behavior, where the 1070 is actually performing the Max-Q 1080 at the lower settings. However, at medium settings or above, the 1080 with Max-Q pulls out in front. This interesting behavior is also observed in Rise of the Tomb Raider, which is an automated benchmark and further supports the last result, which is great as PUBG is hard to benchmark consistently, so I was concerned that my results were just bad. None of the other tests performed this way though, so I'm thinking it's something to do with these specific games rather than a general trend. Again, only at the higher settings does the Max-Q 1080 take the lead, with DirectX 12 giving a slight edge over DirectX 11 in most cases. Watch Dogs 2 saw a nice little boost with the Max-Q 1080. Even at ultra settings we were able to hit the 60fps sweet spot. However, with that said, I still found the game completely playable at ultra settings with the 1070. Shadow of Mordor was almost hitting 120fps and above in all tests. Quite impressive. Only that ultra result from the 1070 let it down. Either of these graphics cards are pretty much overkill for this game unless you've got a display with a fast refresh rate. Doom is another game where the differences aren't that great. The results are all fairly close together. Regardless of the settings, both the 1070 and Max-Q 1080 consistently gave me over 100fps. In Ghost Recon there was a larger difference between the two graphics cards at the lower settings. Then it seems to come much closer together at very high and ultra. This game loves CPU power, and at the higher settings we were starting to become bottlenecked, resulting in the little difference between the 1070 and Max-Q 1080. The Witcher 3 follows a similar pattern, where we can see the larger gap between the two at the lower settings. In either case, even at maximum settings, both options do well above 60fps, which should be fine for most people in this game. Ashes of the Singularity performed fairly similarly between low and extreme settings. Only when we step into crazy territory do things start to degrade more noticeably. Additionally, once again, in most cases, DirectX 12 gives a nice little boost over DirectX 11. Now onto the benchmarking tools. While a useful indicator, note that these results are less practical compared to the real-world gaming tests previously shown. In Heaven Benchmark, there's a much larger difference in frame rate at lower settings compared to the higher settings, whereas in Valley Benchmark all of the results are about the same apart regardless of the setting level used. With the 3D Mark Timespy and Firestrike benchmarks, there's much less of a gap between the two. This is most likely due to the fact that these are synthetic tests, where performance scales much better when compared with actual games. So as expected, the 1080 with Max-Q came out on top in most tests, performing 10.15% better on average compared to the 1070. I was surprised that the 1070 performed better for some of the games at lower settings, compared to the Max-Q 1080. I'm thinking that those games prefer a higher clocked card rather than more CUDA cores at lower settings. So is it worth upgrading to the Max-Q 1080 if you already have a laptop with a 1070? Definitely not. Based on these results, it doesn't really seem worthwhile. You'll only be looking at a small improvement overall, and it's an expensive upgrade as in most cases you'd probably be replacing the entire laptop. If on the other hand you're considering buying a new laptop with either of these cards, then it depends on what you're after. Both of these options are generally overkill for 1080p 60Hz gaming. However, at 120Hz or perhaps larger resolutions, both start to make more sense. It depends on the games that you'll be playing. As we've seen, the FPS can differ quite a lot. Basically, if you can afford a laptop with the Max-Q 1080, want something powerful that will use a little less power than a full 1080 while being quieter, then go for it. But in most cases, I think the generally cheap at 1070 is more than up to the job for most games. games, and it's what I'd personally pick out of the two. The 1080 with Max-Q should use less power and produce less noise. However, as both of the laptops I've tested are completely different, it wouldn't really be a fair comparison here. I'd need two laptops of the same brand and model to do that justice. Regardless, I'm sure people will want to know what I saw, so keeping in mind that these results are basically useless as both laptops were from completely different companies with different cooling designs, these are the results. We can see that the Max-Q 1080 actually ran a little hotter than the 1070, however it was also much quieter, which is one of its selling points. I hope that this video has shown you the real-world differences in performance between the Nvidia 1070 and Max-Q 1080 laptop graphics cards, and helped you choose between them. Let me know down in the comments which graphics card you'll be getting for your next laptop and why. And leave a like on the video if you found the information useful. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for future tech videos like this one.